fast-moving consumer goods were sold on Black Friday last year, rather than in the traditional Christmas season. A report by NielsenIQ Sub-Sahara Africa's Analytics Director, Kobus Eksteen, indicates the FMCG basket was 23% higher than the average of other month-end weeks back in 2021. And he further says this means certain brands are now reliant on Black Friday sales to achieve their targets. Eksteen joins us now to discuss this even further. Kobus, thank you so much for your time, and good morning to you. I mean, what have you found, particularly around the Black Friday frenzy? This, of course, compared to last year.
Yes, good morning. Indeed, we at NielsenIQ, we are fortunate and in the unique position to have the broadest, most holistic coverage of the market. So when we sat down and analyzed Black Friday from last year, looking at well over 300 categories that we cover, some really interesting insights came to the forefront. Like you mentioned, over 55% of volume that was sold through the till during Black Friday was on deal. Like you mentioned also, that week now is 23% higher than the average month-end week that we see throughout the year. In fact, 55% higher when you look at the amount of volume sold on deal. And it definitely is now the biggest single week for the FMCG industry during the year. We saw that it extended its lead over the traditional biggest week during the Christmas festive season, from 2% bigger in 2020 to 6% in 2021. So that's a big jump in a single year.
Yeah, and we're seeing there 4 billion rands sold on discount deals alone. That's fascinating.
Yes, it is. There's definitely, it's the most important week for the industry, the FMCG industry currently. When we look at certain categories and certain brands, like your dishwashing liquid, your rice, your coffee creamers, your whiskey, we found that upwards of 80, some touching 90% of the volume that was sold through the till was on deal. And when we looked at that even further, if we look at a couple of categories like whiskey or dishwashing liquid or biscuits, we found that 22% of the total annual sales are actually happening during that Black Friday week, which I guess is a double-edged sword, right? It shows how important that week is and how well they're doing it. During that week, but obviously that means that they're not kind of doomed to continue this type of behavior, because if they were to stop participating, almost a quarter of their annual sales would suddenly disappear overnight.
Yeah, and that shows the reliant, as you mentioned there, Kobus, on Black Friday sales, obviously to achieve these targets. What does it mean then moving forward for these brands? I mean, is this some sort of a dependence now they've adopted, unfortunately, almost immediately?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, right? I think ultimately, when you look at the consumer lens to it, right, I guess there's really this FOMO consumers that we have in South Africa, right? Southers love a good deal. And ultimately, something like Black Friday is ultimately good for them, right? Because they're getting more products at a discounted price, which they wouldn't have had access to in differently, right? So, but there's some consequences. So, for example, we continually see South Africa being ranked in the top 5 most price-sensitive markets that NielsenIQ measures globally. And when you add into the mix things like inflation or cost of living increases, it means that Black Friday is probably set to remain a very strong and important week for the industry during this year. But like you say, there's some consequences to it, but ultimately the consumer is definitely benefiting from it.
Yeah, but also what does it mean for the emergence of promo-only shoppers?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. We definitely see that picking up, right? Because ultimately, if you're seeing promotions more often, I think if you just take this year as an example, if you're like me, you probably got some emails starting in November already promoting Black Friday or early Friday or whatever they're calling it this year. So there's definitely a case of more promotions happening more often. And that does equate to, over the long term, potentially training consumers to be only shopping on discount. So there is a kind of, I guess, a tipping point in the industry. I'm not sure exactly where that tipping point is, but it's something to keep in mind for the industry. How healthy are we keeping the balance between still being able to maintain your margins and keep a sustainable business, while obviously rewarding the consumer and helping them with the tough times that we're currently facing?
Kobus, with the stats that you've shown us here and the analysis you've just relayed, is it safe to say that Black Friday is here to stay? I think when it started, it almost felt like a once-off. But now it seems like it's part of our annual, sort of like purchasing time and frenzy and promo frenzy, not only in South Africa, but across the world. And I just wonder if it's definitely one here to stay.
I think so. I mean, when we looked at the last couple of years, it's definitely extended its lead in terms of importance over other promotional periods during the year. I think if you're also looking at things like quick commerce, right? You know, e-commerce was supercharged during COVID. And I think it just creates another avenue for the industry to potentially grab sales and push more volume during Black Friday. Now, suddenly, there's another avenue through these quick service delivery type solutions, you know, the 60-minute delivery type of options, whereby, you know, the consumer is benefiting. They're getting access to the same deal without having to go fight crowds in the store.
Yeah.
Whereas the retailers are also potentially now having another avenue through which they can alleviate some of the massive logistical headaches of, you know, servicing all of that volume on you know, one particular day in store, where now they've got different distribution points and it helps from the logistical standpoint. So I think there's many things coming together that would continue the trend and uptake of Black Friday. And given the financial pressure currently on our consumers, I don't see it slowing down anytime soon.
And I appreciate you speaking to us about this morning. Kobus Eksteen, NielsenIQ, Sub-Sahara Africa Analytics Director. Thank you so much for joining us, of course.